I'm joined by David Sandalow, who's a former official at both the State Department and the Department of Energy. He's currently the director of the Energy and Environment Concentration at Columbia University. So, David, we've got 3 continents dealing with extreme weather as well as disasters like flooding and wildfires. Are we now seeing proof that this is a global problem? And if so, should we approach it that way?
It is absolutely a global problem, Ryan. July 4th was, according to some scientists, the warmest day ever recorded by human instruments. And around the world, we're seeing remarkable impacts, as your report just showed. It's a global problem, and we need to address it at a global level. There's been some progress in doing that. We have global agreements that have pointed us in the right direction. But as we're seeing this summer, the progress is not nearly enough.
And is this something where the world is starting to actually begin to see the real danger of climate change? It seemed as though this conversation was a bit esoteric maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Are we now starting to see the impact that's happening right in front of us?
We are absolutely. We are living in an age of consequences. We've been pouring these heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere now for almost a century, and now we're seeing the results. There have been heat waves before, of course, but what happens when we pour these heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere is heat waves like this become more likely and they become more severe when they happen. So according to one analysis, this heat wave in the United States is about 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it would have been in the absence of having all these heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere. One of the best metaphors I've heard is it's like playing with loaded dice. When you have all these gases in the atmosphere, all these phenomena are going to be more common. And by the way, it's not just heat waves; it's also flooding, like we saw in the state of Vermont and in other places that you pointed to in your package. When you have more of these gases in the atmosphere, you have both more severe rain events and more severe droughts.
All right, well, let's talk about the efforts to try and address this. Former Secretary of State John Kerry was with Chinese officials talking about climate policy this week. They didn't seem to really make any concrete progress. Are you disappointed in what came out of those talks?
No. This was the first time that Secretary Kerry had met with his counterpart in person in almost a year. And I wouldn't have expected major announcements or major breakthroughs as a result of a meeting like that. According to the report from Secretary Kerry, he spent more than 12 hours talking with his counterpart, went through a lot of detailed topics. These are very challenging issues. So I didn't expect major announcements here. I was pleased that they agreed to future meetings. Hopefully this will lead up to announcements in the months ahead.
And of course, China, the United States are the 2 largest emitters of greenhouse gas. It would seem that we would need cooperation with China and both America and China agreeing to really deal with this problem. Did they set the tone for their region as much as we set the tone for ours?
Yeah, yes, and I think we both set the tone for the world. As I travel around the world, what I hear is people saying, can't the U.S. and China just work together on this? You're the world's 2 largest emitters. We need you to be working together. And there's a good history here. President Obama and President Xi agreed on important steps back in 2014. That laid the foundation for a global agreement in Paris the next year. We've proved that we can do this, but tensions between the 2 countries are so high right now, it's very difficult to move forward.
And of course, there's tensions within the United States as well, because we're still seeing a pretty popular talking point, mainly from the Republicans running for president of the United States, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, that China and other countries aren't making the sacrifices in their military or economy for these climate initiatives. So therefore, if the United States institutes them, that makes the U.S. weaker. What is your response to that viewpoint?
But China's a study in contrast here. On the one hand, in China in the past year, there's been more solar power deployment than anywhere else in the world by far. In fact, last year there were 6 times more solar panels installed in China than in the United States, and they're ahead of that pace now. In this year, there's a possibility that if they continue at this pace, there'll be more solar panels installed in China this year than have ever been installed in the United States. So give them credit for that. However, at the same time, they continue to build coal plants in China, and coal's the worst offender when it comes to these emissions. So it's a study in contrast. I think we need to get past the rhetoric and get down to really figuring out how we can be constructive in helping each other move towards an energy transition that the world needs. We've been able to do that in the past, and I believe we can do it in the future if we focus on substance and not on heated rhetoric.
Is that the biggest hurdle, that we sometimes focus too much on the rhetoric and we don't actually talk about what would work to try and solve this problem?
Yeah, look, I think the United States and China have extremely serious disagreements on some very important issues. And there's no question that it's very challenging for two countries with such important differences to work together. But in the past, that's happened. Actually, it went in the depths of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union worked together closely on global issues, such as healthcare issues. And I believe that U.S. and China can, and U.S. and China must find a way to do that on the global issues that are so important today, including climate change.
So my last question for you is it too late? Are we going to have to deal with this current reality of how difficult the weather pattern is across the country, or do we still have an opportunity to turn things around?
Such a great question, Ryan. It is not too late to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. We're already seeing some consequences, but if we accelerate the energy transition, if we make changes that can both help our economy and cut down on pollution, we can absolutely avoid the worst consequences that might lie ahead.
Okay. Well, glad to end on an optimistic note, David Sandalow. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.